Hey everybody, I'm here with episode 4, chapter 2, part 2 of the search and rescue story. So I apologize that I had to cut briefly. Sorry guys, I screwed up on the title here. Good Lord, this damn thing. Sorry guys, I'm trying to figure out how this shit's working, and I don't know what's going on with Google Plus. With their transition to YouTube Live, I like that, but all right, there guys. Bring you guys back up front. So I'm gonna definitely try and get a headset because it's a lot easier for me to read with it. As I can move around, I can lay backwards like this. I talk into a webcam, so I try to keep the webcam relatively close to where I'm sitting so you guys can hear me better. As it's, to my knowledge, not a Wisconsin mic, so kind of sucks. For $100, it's not in Wisconsin, but yeah. So let's get started on continuing this story. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been seen last. Kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered that far. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad for because I'm really not good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hotspots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there. It's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area, she's pointing out places she's found people in the past. I see something in the distance. Now, this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there's back roads you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on a state-protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll see is a fire tower or makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see that from here. I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges. And if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I pointed out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase. In the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase with beige carpet and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house, where it obviously should, it's out in the middle of the woods. The sides are carpeted, obviously. And I can see the wood is made of... Sorry, guys. It's almost like a video game glitch where the houses fail to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there, and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually, looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I ask her what the fuck this thing is doing here, and she just chuckles. Get used to it, rookie. You're going to see a lot of them. I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm. Hard. I wouldn't do that if I were you. She says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight. And I just stand there looking at her. You're going to see them all the time. But don't go near them. Don't go looking. Sorry, don't. What? Don't touch them. Don't go up them. Just ignore them. I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best if I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of the training. She was right, though. I'd say about every fifth call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere. And I only find them during the broadest searches or training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for a while. Excuse me. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion, and were at least 10 feet wide. Wow, fuck. With steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. It's normal, don't worry about it. They're not a big deal, but don't go close to them or up them. When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I get a better answer, but it hasn't happened yet. Sorry, guys. I lost track of what I was reading. This is another one that was less spooky and more sad. A young man went missing late in winter, when realistically no one should be going out that far on the trails. We close a lot of them, but some remain open year-round, unless there's a shitload of snow. We did an op for him, but we had about 6 feet of snow on the ground. It was an unusually heavy snow year. And we knew it wasn't likely that we'd find him until spring when that thaw came. Sure enough, when the first big thaw came, a hiker reported a body a little ways off the main trail. We found him at the base of a tree in a pile of melted snow. I knew right away what had happened, and it scared the living shit out of me. Most of you who hike or ski or snowboard, most of you who ski or snowboard or spend any amount of time on a mountain will probably have guessed who. When snow falls, it doesn't collect as thick in some areas beneath branches. It happens most with fir trees because they have a sort of closed umbrella shape. So what you end up with is a space around the base of the tree that's filled with a mixture of loose, powdery snow, air, and branches. They're called tree wells, and they're not immediately obvious if you don't know what you're looking for. We put up signs in the Welcome Center, big ones, letting people know how dangerous they are. But every year that we get an unusual amount of snow, at least one person doesn't read them, or doesn't take the warning seriously, and we find out about it in the spring. My best guess is that this young man was hiking and got tired, or maybe a cramp from walking in the deep snow. He went to sit in the base of the tree, not knowing that there was a tree well, and fell up, and surrounding snow caved in around him. Unable to free himself, he suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it doesn't usually happen except in really deep snow. But if you get stuck in a weird position like this guy did, even in 6 feet of snow, it can be lethal. What scared me the most was imagining how he must have struggled. Upside down in the freezing cold. He didn't die quickly. The snow would have formed a dense, heavy pile on top of him, and it would have been literally impossible to get out. As it got harder to breathe, he would have known what was happening, and I can't even imagine what he was thinking at his last moments. That's pretty fucking sad. Really quickly, somebody asked me, and I'm actually really surprised somebody actually asked me this. I'm going to publish the comment. I should have did it earlier. Like they've heard the story before, and I mentioned that actually quite a few readers read the story, including Corpse Husband, which is probably my favorite scary story reader, or does the same stuff that I'm doing. So in case you guys find it familiar, like you happen to find it sounds in any way, shape, or form familiar, that's why. A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen a goat man while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to chalk it up to the goat man. We got a report. We'd gotten a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down the main area. We hike up to see where she's at, and her husband is just beside. What the fuck? Her husband is just beside himself. That makes lots of sense. He's just beside her. He runs. Well, I guess more jogs to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife started screaming behind him. He tells us that he was a little ways off the trail. Oh, sorry, guys. He runs back to her, and she passes out on the trail. We get her on a backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially what happened was this. She'd been waiting for her husband, and when she started hearing this really strange sound, she said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try hearing it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said then the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part because it was so weird that I don't think I could ever forget, even if I tried. It wasn't a cat, it was a man saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it, and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. It was coming closer and closer, but I couldn't see him. And the closer I got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I fainted. Now, obviously, I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy coming out of the tree. Sorry. Perplexed. As to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods chatting meow, meow at people. So once we get down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm going to go search the area and see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I didn't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more, and what the fuck? Sorry, guys, I'm losing. I don't know if I have dyslexia or some shit. Like, seriously, I'm not even joking. I lose track of where I read so fucking easily with this. I wonder if I possibly... Maybe if I zoom in, it's helping. Oh, okay, that really didn't fucking help. That's too... No, it's too tiny. No. No. Oh, fuck. Now I gotta... And when I head back to go, what the fuck? Sorry, guys. I don't see anyone, so I keep going back about a mile more. And when I head back to go off the trail, see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. Sorry, I head back to go off the trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him come from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone. So I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check in out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying meow meow in this really odd monotone. As comical as it is, and as comical as it sounds, it was almost like that guy on South Park with the electrolyte. I don't know what the fuck that sounds. What that said. Like the electrolarynx Ned. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions eventually. Sorry, from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out, and I end up going back to the Welcome Center. I didn't get any further reports like that. And even though I went back to the area, I never heard that exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people, but even I have to admit it was really weird. So this kind of turned into a massive wall of text, and for that I apologize. I wanted to get to the stories my friends told me, and my friend told me, and he does have some good ones. So I'll post these tomorrow evening. I'll also have a few more on my own. I think you guys will like it. I'm sorry to keep you all in suspense again. Hopefully the stories here make up for it and help you get through the next 24 hours until I can post again. Edit. Since it seems like all of you would like to hear more, tomorrow I'll write up as many stories as I can and do a massive post. I'll include my friends' stories and many stories. Sorry, and see if I can if I can't get a hold of a few. What the fuck? And see if I can get a hold of a few more people who might have interesting things to talk about. I just wasn't sure how people felt about big, huge walls of text. But if you're all okay with it, I'll post stories. Lots of stories. Sorry. I'm gonna yawn. I'm super fucking tired. It's only like 10:45 at night, but I'm still tired. I'm usually up a lot later than this. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna be right back, guys, and I'm gonna go grab some more water, and because my throat's really dry, so I'll be right back. Sorry, guys. Fuck, my phone's gonna die, and I gotta go plug it in. Sorry, guys. I didn't even realize I'm waiting for an important call. So, sorry, guys. I'll be right back again. All right, sorry about that, guys. So I got everything working now. So let's continue. Fuck. Once again, you guys have blown me away with your staggering amount of responses to my stories. There's no way I can respond to each of you individually, so I'm just going to address some common things again, and then move on to the stories I'm going to write, as many as I think of. In addition to my friends' stories, I will probably not update again until I get a chance to answer some questions that I myself have from my superiors. Alright, so the common questions I have found you all had. I'm not comfortable talking about where exactly I work, unfortunately. In all reality, some of the things I've mentioned here could get me in a lot of trouble or fired. So it's best if I just don't discuss too much. I will say, however, that I am in the United States and in an area that is comprised of a great deal of wilderness. We're talking, hundreds of miles of thick forest with a mountain range of a few lakes. There is still a great amount of interest in the stairs. And luckily for you guys, my friend has a story that I think you'll all be very interested in. I'll get into that more at the end of this update. As for whether or not I have ever thought of asking my superiors about them, I have, but again, I don't want to risk my job. However, one of my former superiors no longer works as an SAR officer, and it's possible that he may be willing to talk to me about it. I'll be speaking to him later in the week, and I will let you all know what comes out of that. Now, as far as as far as advice on becoming an SAR officer goes, I think the best advice I can give is to contact your local Forest Service officer and see if they offer any training courses or what the qualifications are. I've been doing this for years, and I started out as a volunteer helping on SAR operations. It's a great job despite the occasional tragic situations, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. Alright, let's move on to the stories. The first happened on a case that I went out on right after I got out of training, and I was still pretty new to everything. Before I took this job, I was a volunteer, so I had a basic idea of what to expect. But on those calls, you're mostly dealing with finding lost people after vets have found signs of them. As an SAR officer, you go out for all kinds of cases, animal bites to heart attacks. This case got called in early in the morning from a young couple who were up on one of the trails that goes by the lake. The husband was completely hysterical, and we couldn't really figure out what the fuck was going on. Oh, sorry, there was no F word. Sorry. Figure out what was going on. We could hear the woman screaming in the background. Sorry, did I not say the husband? Oh, okay, I see. We could hear the woman screaming in the background, and he was begging us to come up there right away. And when we get there, we see him holding his wife, and she's got something in her arms. She's screaming these awful, almost animal-like screams, and he's sobbing. He sees us, and he screams at us to help him, to please get an ambulance up there. Now, obviously, we can't just drive an ambulance up the walk path. So we ask him if his wife needs help or if she can walk on her own. He's still hysterical, but he manages to tell us that it's not his wife that needs help. I go over while one of the vets tries calming him down, and I ask his wife what's going on. She's rocking, holding something, and shrieking. Over and over. I crouch down and see that whatever she's holding, it's covering her with blood. That's when I notice the sling on the front, and my heart sinks. I ask her to tell me what's going on, and I sort of pry her arms gently open so I can see what she's holding. Unfortunately, it's her baby, obviously dead. His head is caved in on one side, and he's covered in scratches. Now, I've seen dead bodies before, but something about this whole situation hits me hard. I have to take a second to compose myself. And I get up and go get one of the other vets who's standing by. I tell him that it's a dead kid. He sort of pats my shoulder and tells me he'll deal with it. It took us over an hour to get this woman to let us see her kid. Every time we try to take him from her, she flips out and tells us we can't have him. That he'll be okay if we just leave her alone and let her help him. But eventually, one of the vets manages to calm her down, and she gives us the body. We took it back to the med area, but when EMTs showed up, they told us that there was never any hope of saving the kid. He died instantly from the trauma to his head. I was good buddies with one of the nurses who met them at the hospital, walking with the baby in a sling, and they stopped because the kid was fussing. Sorry guys. Turns out the couple had been walking with the baby in the sling, and they'd stopped because the kid was fussing. The dad takes the kid and is holding him, looking out over the little gully by the path. The mom comes to stand next to him, but she ends up stepping on a loose patch of soil, and she trips. She falls into the dad, who drops the kid, who ends up falling about 20 feet down this little gully onto the rocks at the bottom. Oh, fuck. I've heard this already, guys, but fuck, that's... Wow. The dad climbed down and recovered the kid, but he'd fallen right on his head and was dead by the time they got there. The baby was only 15 months old. It was a total freak accident, a series of events that coalesced into the worst possible outcome. Probably one of the more awful calls I've been on. Take some water. I haven't seen a lot of animal bites in my time as an SAR officer, but mostly because there aren't that many animals that come around the area. While there are bears in the area, they tend to stay pretty far away from people. The sightings are high and unusual. Sorry, the sightings are highly unusual. They tend to stay pretty far away from people, and sightings are raccoons or skunks. What we do see frequently, though, are moose, and let me tell you, moose are some nasty fuckers. They'll chase after anything for any reason. And God help you if you get between a female and its baby. One of the more amusing calls was a guy who'd gotten chased down by an absolutely massive male moose and was stuck up a tree. It took us almost an hour to get him down, and when he was finally on solid ground again, he looks at me and says, "God damn, them fuckers is big up close." I guess that's not really a scary story, but we still laugh about that one. I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean to laugh at somebody else's just panic, but I'm sorry. That was kind of humorous. I honestly don't know how I'd forgotten the story, but it is by far the scariest thing that's happened to me. I guess maybe I've tried so long to forget about it that it just didn't come to my mind right away. As someone who spends literally all of their time in the woods, you don't ever want to let yourself get scared of being alone or out in the middle of nowhere. That's why when you have experiences like this, you tend to just forget about them on the move. Forget about them, and move on. This is, to date, the only thing that's ever made me really seriously consider if this job is right for me. I don't really like talking about it much, but I'll do my best. I'll do the best I can. Sorry, guys, I'm fumbling the words. I'll do the best I can to remember it all. As I recall, this took place right at the end of spring. It was a typical lost child case. A 4-year-old girl had wandered away from her family's campsite and had been missing for about 2 hours. Her parents were completely despondent and told us what most parents do. My kid would never wander away. She's so good about staying close. She's never done anything like this before. We assure the parents that we'll do everything we can to find her, and we spread out in a standard search formation. I was partnered with one of my good buddies, and we were sort of casually holding conversation while we hiked. I know it sounds callous, but you do sort of become desensitized when you've done this long enough. It becomes the norm, basically. And I think to a certain extent, you have to learn to desensitize yourself in order to work this job. We searched for a good 2 hours, and going well beyond where we think she'd be. And we come out of a small valley when something makes us both stop in unison. We freeze and look at each other. And there's almost a sensation like a plane depressurizing. My ears pop, and I have this odd sensation of having dropped about 10 feet. I start to ask my buddy if he felt that, but before I can, we hear the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. It's almost like a freight train passing directly by us, but it's coming from every direction at once, including above and below us. He screams something to me, but I can't hear him over this deafening roar. Understandably freaked out, we look all around us, trying to find out the source of the sound. But neither of us see anything. Of course, my first thought is a landslide, but we're not near any cliffs. And if we were, it would have had hit us by now. The sound goes on, and we're trying to yell to each other. But even standing close together, we can't hear anything but the sound. Then, as soon as it starts, it stops. Like something threw a switch. Somebody threw a switch and cut it off. Then, sorry, we stand there for a second, perfectly still, and slowly the normal sounds of the woods come back. He asks me what the fuck just happened, but I just kind of shrug, and we stand there looking at each other for a minute. I get on the radio and ask if anyone else just heard the end of the fucking world, but no one else hears it. Even though we're all within shouting distance of each other, my buddy and I just sort of shrug it off and keep going. About an hour later, we all check up on the radios, and no one's found the little girl. Most of the time, we won't search when it gets dark because we don't have any kind of lead on... What? Sorry, when it gets dark. But because we don't have any kind of lead on her, a few of us decide to keep going, including me and my buddy. We keep close together, and we're calling out for her every couple of minutes. And at this point, I'm hoping beyond hope that we find her. Because while I may not like kids, the idea of them being all alone in the dark is awful to me. Yeah. The woods can be intimidating to kids in the daylight, and at night, well, it's a whole different beast. But we're not seeing any signs of her or getting any response, and around midnight, we decide to turn around and head back to the rendezvous point. I was about to say rendezvous. Rendezvous. Oh, God. We're about halfway back when my buddy stops and shines his light to the right of us into a really thick deadfall or group of dead trees. I ask him if he's heard a response, but he just tells me to be quiet a second and listen. I do, and in the distance, I can hear what sounds like a kid crying. We both call the girl's name and listen for any kind of response, but it's just this really faint crying. We hear it in the direction of this deadfall and go around it, calling her name over and over. As we get closer to the crying, I start to get this weird feeling in my gut, and I tell my buddy that something isn't right. He tells me he feels the same way, but we can't figure out what it is. We stop where we are and call the girl's name again. And at the same time, we both figure it out. The crying is on a loop. It's the same little hitching sob, then wail, then quiet hiccup, repeated over and over. It's exactly the same every time, and without saying another word, we both take off running. It's the only time I've lost my composure like that. But something about it was so incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back to the rendezvous point, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sounds sort of anticlimactic, but that call fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her and all the other people who we've never found, but frankly, I doubt we'll ever find anything. Of the missing persons calls I've gone out on, only a handful have ever resulted in a complete disappearance, meaning no trace of the person and no body ever found. But sometimes finding a body just leads to more questions than answers. There are some of the bodies we found that have become infamous in our team. A teenage boy whose remains were recovered almost a year after he vanished. We found the top of his skull, 2 finger bones, and his camera almost 40 miles seen. The camera, sadly, was A month, all we found. The lower jaw and right foot of a 2-year-old boy on the highest peak of a ridge in the southern part of the park. The body of a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome, almost 20 miles from where she'd vanished. She had died of exposure 3 weeks after going missing, and all of her clothes were intact except for her shoes and jacket. There were berries and cooked meat in her stomach when they did the autopsy. The coroner said it appeared as if someone had been taking care of her. There were no suspects ever identified. The frozen body of a 1-year-old baby found a week after vanishing in the hollow trunk of a tree 10 miles away from the area he was last seen. There was fresh milk found in his stomach, but his tongue was gone. Ew. That's pretty fucked up. I don't know what you need a tongue for, but wow. A single vertebra, sorry guys. I hear me most. A single vertebra and right kneecap of a 3-year-old girl found in the snow almost 20 miles from the campground her family had been at the previous summer. Holy fuck. A whole fucking year passed. Fuck me, man. Talk about technology. I'm sorry, I gotta point it out. The fact that a year's passed, all the decomposing has happened and whatnot, or whatever, I don't know what happens to bones. I'm assuming that they do at some point decompose as well, like the rest of a body. Obviously, I'm going to assume, or not obviously, but I'm going to assume that it happens a lot slower than like flesh, but and organs and whatnot. But as those are like meaty kind of things, and bones are like solid. I don't know. Maybe it's a stupid assumption, but now on to a couple of the stories my friend told me. I mentioned that you were all interested in the stairs, and you're in luck. He's had a closer encounter with them. Though he doesn't have any explanation for them, he does have a bit more experience with them than I do. My buddy has been an SAR officer for about 7 years. He started when he was a junior in college, and he had a very similar experience when he first encountered the stairs. His trainer told him almost the same thing mine did, which was never go near, never touch, or ascend them. For the first year, he did just that, but apparently his curiosity got the better of him. And on one call, he broke away from the line and went back to go check a set of them out. He said they were about 10 miles away from the path when a teenage girl had vanished, and the dogs were following the scent. He was on his own, lagging behind the main group, when he saw a set of stairs to his left. Like they were from a new house because the carpeting was pristine and white. He said that as he got closer, noises or hear any weird noises. He was expecting something to happen, like bleeding from his ears or collapsing, but he got right up next to them and didn't feel anything. The only thing, he said, that was odd was that there was absolutely no debris on the steps, no dirt, leaves, dust, anything. And there didn't appear to be any signs of animal or insect activity in the immediate area, which he found strange. It was less like things were avoiding them, and more like they just happened to be in a relatively barren part of the forest. He touched the stairs and didn't feel anything except that sort of sticky feeling you get from a new carpet. Making sure his radio was on, he slowly climbed the stairs. He said it was terrifying because the way they'd been stigmatized, he wasn't really sure what was going to happen to him. He joked that half of him expected to be teleported to some other dimension, and the other half was watching for a UFO to come swooping down. But he got to the top of the... He got to the top with little event, and he stood there looking around. But he said the longer he stood on the top step, the more he felt like he was doing something very, very wrong. He described it as the feeling you'd get if you were in a part of a government building you have no business being in. As if someone was going to come and arrest you or shoot you in the back of the head at any second. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling got stronger and stronger. And that's when he realized that he couldn't hear anything anymore. And for the force, I'm sorry, the sounds of the forest were gone, and he couldn't hear his own breathing. Sorry, I lost track. It was like some kind of weird, awful tinnitus, but more apprehensive. He climbed back down the stairs and rejoined the search. And he didn't mention what he'd done, but he said the weirdest part came after. His trainer was waiting back at the welcome center after the search ended for the day. And he cornered my buddy before he could leave. He said his trainer had this look of intense anger. He asked, "What's wrong? What was wrong?" What he said next shocked the hell out of me. "You went up them, didn't you?" My buddy said it wasn't phrased as a question. He asked how his trainer knew. The trainer just shook his head and said, "Because we didn't find her. The dogs lost her scent." My buddy asked what that had to do with anything. The trainer asked how long he'd been on the stairs, and my buddy said no longer than a minute. The trainer gave him this really awful, almost dead-eyed look, and told him that if he ever went up another set of stairs again, he'd be fired immediately. The trainer walked away, and I guess he's never answered any of the questions my buddy asked him about it since. But my buddy has been involved in a lot of missing persons cases where there has never been a trace of them found. I mentioned David Paulides, and my buddy said he could confirm that those stories are, for the most part, accurate. He said that most of the time, if the person isn't found right away, they're either never found or they're found weeks, months, or even years later in places they can't possibly have gotten to. One story he told me really stood out that involved a 5-year-old boy with a severe mental disability. The little boy vanished from a picnic area in the late fall. In addition to the mental disability, he was also physically handicapped. And his parents explained over and over that he simply could not have vanished. It was impossible. Someone had to have taken him. My buddy said they searched for this kid. For weeks, going miles out of the accepted range. But it was like he'd never been there. The dogs couldn't pick up his scent anywhere, not even in the picnic area, where he'd apparently vanished from. Suspicion fell on the parents, but it was pretty clear that they were devastated and hadn't done anything sinister to their kid. The search was concluded about a month later, and my buddy said everyone had pretty much forgotten it by later in the winter. He was out on a training op in the snow on one of the higher peaks when he came across something in the snow. He said he saw it from far away at first, and when he got closer, he realized it was a shirt, frozen and sticking part way out of the powder. He recognized it as belonging to the kid because it had a distinctive pattern. About 20 yards away, he found the kid's body, laying partially buried in the snow. My buddy said there was no way the kid had been dead for any more than a few days, even though he'd been missing for almost 3 months. The kid was curled around something, and when my buddy brushed off the snow to see what it was, he said he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a big chunk of ice that had been carved crudely to look like a person. Oh my God. The kid was holding it so tight that it had frostbitten his chest and hands. which my buddy could tell even with the decay that had taken place. He radioed all of this for me. Sorry. He radioed the rest of the crew, and they took the body off the mountain. Now he recapped all of this for me. And to put it simply, there was no way this kid could have both survived almost 3 months on his own or have gotten to this peak. There was no physical way this child had walked almost 50 miles and ended up on the top of a goddamn mountain. To top it off, there was nothing in the kid's stomach or colon. Nothing. Not even water. It was like my buddy said, the kid had been taken off the face of the earth, put in suspended animation, and dropped on the mountain months later, only to die of exposure. He's never really gotten over that one. The last story I'll share for him was one that took place relatively recently, only a few months ago. They were out doing a recon for mountain lions because there had been several reports of sightings in the last couple of days. One of our jobs is to scout out the areas where these animals are seen to ensure that if they are in the area, we can warn people and close off those trails. He was out on his own in a very heavily forested part of the park towards dusk when he heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance. Now, as most of you know, when a mountain lion screams, it sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. Really quickly, I've mentioned this in this part of the story when the guy from Corpse Husband reads this. I used to live many years ago, actually. Oh, not many years ago, maybe about 5 years ago, in a house. I'd lived in there for so many years, many years. And we had a lot of foxes and coyotes. And basically, when I don't know if they go into heat, I believe they're cats. It could be dogs. I'm pretty sure they're cats. Probably sounds stupid saying it if they're not. And basically, either they were in heat, because I know cats, when they go in heat, they like to meow and whatnot. Or they can meow really loudly, or in other words, they can kind of like scream. And it's really, literally, it's traumatizing. Like I get nightmares. Like I've never gotten nightmares of anything, but I used to get nightmares of that every night. Like it was crazy. Basically, when they either that or it's a mating call. I don't remember what it was. A buddy of mine was telling me about that. He's really into animals and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's pretty fucked up when you hear it. I'll try and link you guys to it. I don't know if I should because it is pretty fucked up, like I mentioned. Pardon my French, but yeah, like it's scary, literally. Like it's scary. I'm pretty sure you guys figured that out. It's unsettling, but far from abnormal. My buddy radioed back to let ops know that he'd heard one, and that he was going to keep going. He was going to keep going to see if he could figure out where its territory started. He heard the mountain lion scream a couple more times, always from the same spot, and determined an approximate area of the mountain lion's territory. He was about to head back when he heard another scream, this time within a few yards of him. Of course, he freaks out and starts heading back at a much faster pace, because the last thing he wants is to run into a goddamn mountain lion and get mauled to death. As he got back on the path, he started heading back. The screaming followed him, and he broke into a jog. When he was about a mile from ops, the screaming stopped. And he turned around to see if it was following him. It was almost night by this point, but he said in the distance, just before the path rounded a corner, he could see what looked like a male figure. He called out to them, warning them that the paths were closed and that he needed to come back to the welcome center. The figure just stood there, and my buddy started to walk over. When he was about 10 yards away, the figure took, as he described, an impossibly long step toward him and let out the same scream my buddy had been hearing. My buddy didn't even say anything. He just turned and sprinted back to ops never looking back behind him. By the time he got back, the screaming had moved back into the woods. He didn't mention it to anyone else. Just said that there was a mountain lion in the area and that they would need to close the pass off until the animal could be located and moved. I'm going to end this entry here since it's turned into a huge wall of text. I'm going to be heading out on a yearly training tomorrow morning, so I'll be gone until early next week. I'll be meeting with a lot of former trainers and buddies who work in other areas of the park, and I'll be asking around about any stories they'd like to share. I'm so glad you guys have been interested. Sorry, guys. I'm so glad you guys have been interested in my stories, and once I'm back from this hop, I'll continue to share them. So that is obviously where I'm going to end it off for today. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I really hope you guys like these longer ones. I'm going to do the next few ones where I just read maybe sections of the story, or maybe one story to kind of get like a few minutes in, and then end it off and do a couple of videos like that. But until next time, guys, thanks for listening. Rate, subscribe, and comment. Until next time, stay spooky and peace out. Oh, really quickly, I forgot to mention, somebody had asked where they can submit, and I always mention in the description is where you can email me your stories. I'm so happy that people are actually getting back to me about this. I never actually thought people would, but obviously you do. And yeah. So again, I'll link it in the not link it, sorry, I'll put it in the description for you guys to go and email me, as well as any other updated information that I want you guys to know about in relation to the Reddit Read series will be out in the description as well. So thanks for listening.